My phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. I was already awake, standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the frost melt off the back garden. When I saw my son's name on the screen, something cold settled in my chest before I even answered. "Mom." His voice came out cracked, like something in him had already broken. "Mom, I don't know what to do." I set my mug down slowly. "Tell me where you are." "The parking lot of a Walgreens on Briar Mill Road." "I've got the kids in the car." "It's cold, Mom." "It's really cold." I was already moving toward my coat. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming." I found them 40 minutes later. My son was sitting on the hood of his car despite the January air, arms wrapped around himself, staring at nothing. In the back seat, my 2 grandchildren were asleep against each other. The older one, 7 years old, with his little sister's head tucked under his chin. They were still in their pajamas. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked up and put my arms around my son, and he let out a sound I hadn't heard from him since he was a small boy who'd fallen off his bicycle. He was 41 years old, and he shook like he was coming apart. "Come on," I said quietly. "Let's get the children somewhere warm." In my car, once the heat was running and the kids were still sleeping in the back, I handed him the coffee I'd thought to bring in a thermos. He wrapped both hands around it. His hands were shaking. "She changed the access codes," he said. "I went in yesterday morning to open the office and my keycard didn't work. I tried to call my wife, but she didn't pick up. Then I checked our joint account. She'd already moved everything. Every dollar, Mom. The mortgage is due in 11 days. I have $43 in my personal checking account." I kept my voice even. "When did you last see your wife?" 2 nights ago. We had an argument. Not a big one, I thought. Just about the Henderson contract. She left to go stay at her mother's for the night. To cool off, she said. He let out a short, bitter exhale. "She didn't come back. And your daughter-in-law's mother, was she involved in the business?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me, like the question surprised him. "She's been on the board since we incorporated. Silent member. That was the arrangement when we got the startup capital. She put in $200,000. My wife said it was just family helping family." I nodded slowly. Here is what my son didn't know about his mother-in-law. He'd never had reason to look closely. She presented herself as a gracious woman, elegant home in Buckhead, a philanthropist's smile always first to hug him at Christmas. But I had watched her for 9 years. I had noticed things my son was too in love to see. The way she steered every conversation back to money, to ownership, to who owed what to whom. The way she introduced my son at parties, always a half-second pause before his name, as if she were still deciding whether he was worth the breath. The way she'd once said to me, over a glass of wine at Thanksgiving, that her daughter had always been destined for something bigger. She'd smiled when she said it. She was smiling at me. I'd smiled back. I hadn't said a word. What she didn't know about me was considerably more significant than what I knew about her. I spent 31 years in corporate finance before I retired. I was the CFO of a regional logistics company for 12 of those years before we were acquired by a national firm. When the acquisition closed, I took my equity payout and did 3 things. I paid off my house, I put money in trust for my grandchildren's education, and I invested quietly in 7 early-stage companies through a holding entity that carried no name anyone would recognize as mine. I had learned long ago that the most powerful position in any room is the one no one is looking at. One of those 7 companies was a commercial real estate data firm called Meridian Analytics. They had, over the past 4 years, become the primary data provider for exactly the kind of boutique property development work my son's mother-in-law had spent the last decade building her reputation on. Without Meridian's market assessments, her projects couldn't get financed. Without financing, her projects didn't move. It was the kind of leverage that was quiet and total and completely invisible until you chose to use it. I had never chosen to use it. I drove my son and grandchildren home, fed them breakfast, and put the children in front of a movie with blankets. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a fresh cup of coffee, and I got to work. First, I needed to understand exactly what she had done. I called a friend of mine, a woman I'd worked alongside for 20 years, who now ran a boutique firm that did forensic financial consulting. She owed me nothing, and I owed her nothing, which was exactly the kind of friendship that gets things done without complications. I walked her through what my son had told me. Board member with a 20% stake, joint accounts drained, keycard access revoked. She said, if she moved the money, there's a paper trail. Give me until this afternoon. By noon, my son's wife had called him twice. He showed me the texts. The first said simply, I need some space to think. The second, an hour later, said, my attorney will be in touch about next steps. She'd added a broken heart emoji at the end, which struck me as a particular kind of cruelty, whether she intended it that way or not. I asked my son if he thought his wife understood what her mother had done. He was quiet for a long time. She's not a cruel person, he finally said. She's not. I've always believed that. I believe it too, I told him. And I did. I had watched his wife for 9 years also. She was a woman who had been taught, from the time she was small, to trust her mother's judgment absolutely. That is a form of love. It is also a form of control, and the two can live inside the same person for a very long time before she learns to tell them apart. What her mother had done, I suspected, was this. She had waited for the right argument, any argument, and used it as the opening. She had told her daughter that the marriage was wrong, that my son had never been the right fit, that this was her chance to reset. She had probably used the word deserve several times. She had probably cried a little. She was a woman who knew exactly how to deploy her own tears. Then she had moved fast, before her daughter could change her mind, and she had dismantled my son's financial life with the efficiency of someone who had been planning the exit strategy for quite a while. My friend called back at 2:15 in the afternoon. She didn't just drain the joint accounts, she said. She had her daughter sign a document 11 days ago, before the argument, before any of this, reclassifying your son's ownership stake in the company. He went from 40% to 15%. She used a provision in the original operating agreement that allows the board to dilute a member's interest if they miss 2 consecutive capital calls. Your son missed them because the capital call notices were sent to an email address he hadn't used in 2 years. I sat very still. She set it up, I said. It appears that way, yes. Who drafted the documents? A firm called Whitmore and Associates. They're her personal attorneys. They've been her personal attorneys for 22 years. All right, I said. Thank you. I closed my laptop and went to stand at the window again. Outside, my grandchildren had apparently woken up and wandered into the backyard despite the cold. My son was out there with them, pushing his daughter on the old wooden swing I'd hung from the oak tree when he was small. Watching him push her, the same motion he probably watched me use on him 35 years ago. I felt something move through me that had no name I could put to it. It was somewhere between grief and steel. I picked up my phone and called the managing director of Meridian Analytics. His name was David Park, and he answered on the second ring. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Margaret, you've never asked us for anything. I know, I said. I'm asking now. What I asked for was simple, and it was devastating. I asked him to pull Meridian's data licensing agreement with her development firm, not suspend it, pull it, effective at the end of the current billing cycle, which was 12 days away. Without our assessments, she can't close her Riverside project, he said. I know. Another pause. The Riverside project is about $40 million. I know what it is. He said he'd handle it personally. I wasn't done. I spent the next 2 hours making calls. I was methodical and I was calm and I was not angry in any way that clouded my thinking. What I felt was closer to a kind of clarity, the way a room looks after you've pulled back every curtain at once and the light comes in all together. I called an attorney I had worked with for over a decade, a woman who specialized in business litigation and who had the particular skill of making opposing counsel feel slightly afraid without them being able to explain exactly why. I walked her through everything my financial consultant had found. She listened without interrupting. The capital call manipulation is fraudulent if she controlled the delivery mechanism, she said. She did. The notices went to an address she knew he wasn't using. The address change was made 18 months ago from an IP address registered to her office building. A pause. You've done your homework. I've had 6 hours. Give me until morning, she said. That evening, my son put the children to bed in my guest room and came downstairs and found me at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in notes. He sat across from me and looked at what I'd written for a long time without speaking. Mom, he finally said, what are you doing? What needs to be done? You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I looked up at him. Your father would have done this. I'm doing it because it's right, and because those children upstairs deserve a father who isn't buried under what she tried to do to him, and because she chose to look at my son and decide he wasn't worth consideration. That was her mistake, not you. That was hers. He looked at me for a long moment and then he nodded, once, slowly. What can I do? Sleep, I said. You're going to need to be clear-headed for what comes next. He went upstairs. I stayed at the table until nearly midnight. In the morning, my attorney called with a preliminary assessment that was, in her word, promising. The fraudulent reclassification gave us grounds for an emergency injunction to freeze any further actions against my son's ownership interest. The email record was damning. The IP address alone, originating from her office building on the date of the address change, was the kind of detail that tends to make judges impatient. But it was the third thing my attorney found that changed the shape of everything. The original operating agreement, she said, the one she used against your son, it contains a reciprocal clause. Any board action that's later found to have been executed in bad faith with intent to defraud automatically triggers a full ownership audit. Under the audit provision, if malfeasance is confirmed, the offending party forfeits their interest entirely. I let that land. So if we prove the capital call manipulation was intentional, her 20% goes to zero, my attorney said. She doesn't just lose the Riverside project. She loses her stake in the entire company. The company my son had spent 7 years building from nothing. The company that was now worth, by the most conservative estimate, somewhere north of $8 million. File the injunction, I said. The injunction was filed that afternoon. My son's mother-in-law learned about it, I was told, while she was having lunch with her interior designer to discuss the finishes on her Riverside project's model unit. Her attorney called her mid-meal. Witnesses later described her as having gone quite pale. That same afternoon, the notification from Meridian Analytics arrived at her firm's inbox. The data licensing agreement would not be renewed. They wished her well in her future projects. The letter was 3 sentences long and cordial, and it closed a door that had no other key. The Riverside project's lead financier called her within the hour. Without Meridian's assessments, he explained, their risk committee couldn't approve the final draw. He was sorry. He truly was. I heard about all of this secondhand, through channels, the way I hear about most things. I didn't need to be in the room. I had never needed to be in the room. What I needed to be in the room for happened 4 days later. My daughter-in-law called my son. She had been, in the days since the injunction filing, in a situation I had expected and felt some sympathy for. She had learned in real time that the story her mother had told her about her husband was not the full story, that the argument that was supposed to be her opening had in fact been manufactured, that the documents she'd signed had not been what her mother described them as, that her mother had looked her in the eye and used her love as an instrument. That is a terrible thing to discover. I did not take pleasure in it. My son spoke with her for a long time. I gave him his privacy. When he came to find me afterward, he looked like a man who had just walked through something very hard and was still deciding what was on the other side of it. She didn't know, he said. I didn't think she did. She wants to come home. She wants to fix it. She doesn't know if we can. I chose my next words carefully. That's between the two of you. It's entirely yours to decide. What I can tell you is that she is not her mother. And you're not the decision you make today. You're the pattern you make over 10 years. Whatever you choose, make sure it's yours. He nodded slowly. What about her mother? He asked. Her mother's attorneys have indicated they want to negotiate a settlement. They reached out to my attorney this morning. He looked at me. What kind of settlement? The kind where she reinstates your 40% ownership interest, acknowledges the fraudulent reclassification in writing, and returns every dollar she moved out of the joint accounts, plus interest. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal fraud charges. I paused. My attorney believes a DA would be interested. I want you to know that option is on the table if you want it. He was quiet for a long time. The kids, he finally said. She's their grandmother. I know. I don't want them to. He stopped, started again. I don't want this to follow them. I understood what he was saying. He was not asking me to let her off the hook for his own sake. He was already thinking about his children. He was, in that moment, a better person than the situation required him to be. Then we take the settlement, I said, but she signs everything, in writing, witnessed, notarized, and she never comes near your business again. Agreed. The settlement was signed 8 days later. My son's ownership interest was restored. The joint accounts were made whole. A new operating agreement was drafted that replaced her entirely with an independent board member selected by my son. I was not at the signing. I didn't need to be. What I heard from my attorney was that my son's mother-in-law had asked at the end of the meeting to know who had orchestrated the Meridian situation. Her attorney had apparently advised her not to ask. She had asked anyway. My attorney had told her simply, his mother. There was a pause, apparently, before she responded. I should have paid closer attention, she said. My attorney told me she said it with something close to respect. Whether or not that was true, I couldn't say. I didn't need her respect. I had never been working for her respect. The morning after the settlement, I made breakfast, eggs and toast and fresh orange juice, and my son and daughter-in-law and both grandchildren sat around my kitchen table in the early light. My daughter-in-law and I hadn't spoken much yet. There was time for that. She sat across from me, and I could see on her face the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from work, but from seeing something clearly that you'd had reason not to see before. After a while, she looked at me and said quietly, "I'm sorry. I need to say that to you. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize to me for," I said. And I meant it. "I should have. You trusted your mother," I said. "That's not a flaw. That's love. What was done with it? That was her failure, not yours." She pressed her lips together and nodded. My granddaughter, who was 5 and had the attention span of a hummingbird, chose this moment to knock her orange juice across the table, which dissolved the weight of the conversation entirely and gave everyone something to do for a few minutes. By the time we cleaned it up, something had shifted. Not everything. Not by a long measure. But something. My son caught my eye across the table and gave me a look I recognized. He'd given me that same look when he was 8 years old and had been afraid of something, and I'd handled it. And afterward he was safe, and he knew it. It was a look that had nothing performative in it. It was just a fact between us. I looked back at him and nodded once. Afterward, when everyone had cleared out and I was alone in the kitchen again with my coffee, I stood at the window and watched the oak tree in the yard. The same tree. The same swing. The light was different in late January. Thinner, somehow, more honest. It showed you things without softening them. I thought about the woman who had sat across a Thanksgiving table from me years ago and said her daughter had always been destined for something bigger. I thought about the half-second pause before my son's name. She had looked at him and she had not seen what I saw. She had looked at his life and thought it was something she could dismantle. She had looked at me and seen a retired woman of a certain age, with no visible relevance to her plans. That is the thing about quiet power. It is invisible precisely because people with loud power cannot imagine that anyone would choose not to display it. I have spent my life choosing not to display it. Not because I was ashamed of it. Not because I was ashamed of it. Not because I was afraid. But because I learned very early that the person in the room who says the least is often the person who understands the most, and that understanding, real, patient, unglamorous understanding, is worth more than any performance of strength I have ever witnessed. My son thought he didn't know what to do. I knew. I had always known, not because I am exceptional, But because I am 63 years old and I have been paying attention for every single one of those years, to my children, to the people around them, to the systems those people operate within, to where the leverage lives and what it costs and what it's worth. I did not rescue my son. I refused that word. He had already done the hard work of building his life, 7 years of it, a company made from nothing, a family, a home. What I did was refuse to let someone else's bad faith destroy what he had built. There is a difference between those two things, and it matters. The swing moved slightly in the wind outside. The light kept coming in at its honest angle. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it in the rack to dry, and I went to call my financial consultant to thank her, and then I was going to return to being a retired woman of a certain age who tends her garden and sees her grandchildren on weekends. Until the next time someone decides that is all I am. They are always welcome to make that mistake. I have been waiting, quietly, every time.